Yasmine, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Thanks, Stefan.
Great. Given that I think you're standing in the middle of Islamabad airport, which I think is a first for a remote briefing, so you get a medal for that. I think we will go to you first, so you don't have to wait standing for 20 minutes in the midst of an airport.
Thank you very much.
So if I can just take a second to introduce you. We're delighted to be joined by Yasmine Sherif, the Director of Education Cannot Wait, the UN Global Fund for Education in Emergencies and Protracted Crises. As mentioned, she's joining us virtually from Islamabad Airport as she's just landed after a field visit to Afghanistan. So, Yasmine, please go ahead and you have the floor, and then we'll take some questions.
Thank you very much, Stefan. Good afternoon, everyone. And for those of you who don't know what Education Cannot Wait, the Global UN Fund is, it's a global fund that was created at the World Humanitarian Summit by the UN Secretary General, Special Envoy for Global Education, Gordon Brown, and member states of the UN, civil society and UN agencies. And our job is to deliver on Sustainable Development Goal 4 together with our UN actors and civil society in countries of conflict and crisis. Now, Afghanistan, I just arrived at Islamabad airport. It was a joint mission, all-female mission, women mission, together with our colleagues of UNICEF leadership in Kabul, in Afghanistan, and the Education Cannot Wait team from New York. Now, I can tell you what I have seen just a few hours ago as I departed Kabul. Afghanistan is on the brink of collapse, and I'm very serious about that. About 20 years of development gains that we have made are about to be lost if we don't take immediate action. Until mid-August of this year, 45% of the GDP was ODA funding and 75% were budget expenditures covered by ODA. All of that is gone now in Afghanistan. Over 50% of the population do not know where to get the next meal. There is a severe food insecurity, and I think WFP has spoken strongly to that. There is a very harsh winter arriving. There's an economic meltdown, prolonged drought, COVID-19, extreme poverty, starvation is very real, and we are speaking about 40 years of armed conflict. Civil servants, and here I speak to the plight of the teachers, have not been paid salaries. There is no money to pay their salaries. And the ones who are suffering the brunt of this are the children, the girls and the boys and the adolescents of Afghanistan. They are suffering from the economic meltdown and from the lack of access to basic services as a result of lack of financing. Now, the objective of the mission was to support our in-country partners, UNICEF being one of the main ones, with 75 years of presence in Afghanistan and 8 field offices across the country. Others are UNHR, WFP, and UN Women, and OCHA, and numerous of international and national non-governmental organizations who have a large presence across the country. What the challenge we have here, and which is not impossible, provided that we get the funding, is that we implement Sustainable Development Goal 4 and all the other Sustainable Development Goals in the middle of the biggest humanitarian crisis on earth today. During our mission, we met with all the UN agencies, we met with the UN Secretary General Special Representative, and we met with the civil society organizations and with the de facto authorities, because we believe we need to follow the humanitarian imperative. And the humanitarian imperative means that we are apolitical and we focus on the people in Afghanistan, the ones who are suffering. And for us, it's the children and adolescents, the girls, the children with disabilities. Before mid-August, Afghanistan was already suffering harshly in a crisis, and a severe crisis due to COVID-19. Schools were closed as a result of COVID-19 already in 2020 and 21. And of course, again, 40 years of conflict. Despite that, education cannot wait. Together with its partners, UN agencies, UNICEF being one of our grantees, Save the Children another one, amongst others, we were able to invest $45 million through joint work and programming to invest in community-based education and accelerated learning programs for girls as well as boys. And we reached 58% girls through that investment since 2019. And these are children and youth and girls in the hardest to reach areas, because 75% of the Afghan population live in the rural areas. And as you know, the topography is a very challenging one in mountainous country. 75% of the population live in that kind of condition. But what we realized from this mission, this is not enough. We need at least $1 billion, a minimum of $1 billion to be invested into the education sector to ensure that all girls and boys can attend quality education in a continuous from primary through secondary school in Afghanistan. And we have to work collectively. On the ground, we see UN agencies, civil society organizations coming together through real team spirit and joint programming. And we see WFP scaling up, UNICEF scaling up, UNHCR scaling up for the refugees and the returnees. And we also seen primary schools have opened, and we visited a school of mixed girls and boys today, of primary students in Kabul just before we departed. We also know that secondary schools have opened for girls in some provinces in north and southern Afghanistan. We see great work by NGOs such as the Swedish Committee for Afghanistan or the Aga Khan Foundation doing the negotiations at district level to open up secondary education for girls in these provinces. We also need to urgently, we need teacher payment. We cannot have education if we don't pay the teachers. And UNICEF have in place the capacity modalities for delivering teacher salaries. And in our discussions with the de facto authorities, they told us that they remain committed to open up secondary education for girls. This is what they told us. We have also seen from our colleagues on the ground in the UN and civil society that access have improved across the country significantly, which opens up the operational space. So what is important is to depolitize this and base our work on the humanitarian imperative. And often we get the questions, how can we reach the children and the youth of Afghanistan and the people without politicizing this? Well, it is important to remember, and I have worked for the UN for the past 31 years. In humanitarian crisis, if you want to implement development programming such as education, you use the direct execution modality. And this is what everyone is doing. The funding goes straight to the UN agencies, straight to the civil society organizations, and they do the actual implementation. And in this way, you remain apolitical, but you focus on the people who are suffering. So this is not new. We don't need new mechanisms. The direct execution modality has been there for decades, and it works. So we work together. We implement the Secretary General's new way of working through joint programming collectively, because we all have to work together. Now, what is missing is funding. And for all of our member states who are also ODA countries and other private sectors, it's important to bear in mind that when we speak about the humanitarian development nexus, this is the humanitarian development nexus in reality. 4.2 million Afghan children, girls and boys, are out of school. 10 million girls have yet to return to school. Teachers need salaries. We need rehabilitation. We need to reach the countryside. We need water and sanitation. We need to scale up now. Their education cannot wait. Action cannot wait across all sectors. Financing and funding cannot wait. and our own humanity cannot wait. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Yasmine. And we will now go to our first question from Edie Lederer, the Associated Press.
Thank you very much on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association. Thank you for doing this briefing, and it's sort of fun to see the backdrop of the airport behind you. A couple of questions. First, you talked about $1 billion being needed. Over what period is that? Is that immediately? Is that for the next year? And what specifically would that money be earmarked for? And secondly, you said that, as we know, some provinces are allowing girls to go to secondary school. What efforts are being made to ensure that girls are allowed to go to secondary school in every province? And what about university education for girls? And finally, what kind of contacts have you had with the Taliban? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very pertinent questions. First of all, the 1 billion is what we collectively in the education community, UNICEF, the Global Partnership for Education, UNESCO, the World Bank, all of us who are in the education sector, Save the Children, International Rescue Committee, and so forth. It's a guesstimate for at least 3 years. You see, when we do education and development in a crisis context, to ensure continuity and predictability of funding, we have to do a minimum of 3 years of programming at a time. Programming. I don't speak about plans. I mean, we're speaking about real programming here that delivers. So I've been estimated of at least 1 billion over a period of 3 years. But that is a very modest estimation. We are speaking about a broken education system that has lasted for a longer period of time, and which occurs in a country that has been at war for 40 years, in an extreme poverty as well. The main priority right now is to deliver salaries to teachers and school administration. And as I mentioned, UNICEF has the capacity and the modalities in place to do so immediately should the financing be forthcoming. So that is a top priority, because without teachers, we have no schools. Rehabilitation, minor rehabilitations of existing schools, but also to be able to establish new schools across the countryside. As I mentioned, 75% of the Afghan population live in the countryside. And through community-based education that is linked to the formal system, we are able to ensure continuity in their education and make sure that it's formalized. Other parts are, of course, water and sanitation. All of that is part of the education system, also now during COVID times, but also to ensure that girls can go to school during the menstruational periods, and also to ensure hygiene. Other areas are, of course, psychosocial services. You can imagine being a child born in times of war, growing up in times of war, and the traumas that they have experienced, and that's also a part. What is important to bear in mind that education is also a way of bringing the community together. That's where they feel safe. That's where they, parents, meet with the teacher, the school administration, the local community leaders. So it has also a very strong social and psychosocial impact on the development and the future of the young generation. Now, in terms of girls' education, the efforts, and I mentioned those efforts, now those provinces in the north and south, Yasmine Sherif, Sabul, and a few others, is very much a result of either that at district level decisions were made to reopen them fast, or the great work that is being done by our colleagues on the ground UNICEF, one of them, but also, as I mentioned, Aga Khan Foundation, Save the Children, the Swedish Afghanistan Committee. Because in Afghanistan, you negotiate, you talk, you build trust. I have worked and lived in Afghanistan in the 90s, and this is how you open access. And now, since the UN community and the NGO community have access to virtually across the country, they are negotiating access for girls' secondary education and are doing so with gradual progress. So that these are the efforts that are ongoing. Now, how is that made possible? Because the United Nations have made a decision, a policy decision, to put the humanitarian imperative above and depoliticize this so that we can engage with the de facto authorities to make these negotiations for girls' secondary education. So these are ongoing negotiations on the ground, slowly and gradually opening up secondary schools. And hopefully, if we can trust what we've been told, this will continue to advance. And the contact that we had, we met with the de facto authorities responsible for education. I'm a human rights lawyer specialized in IHL and human rights, with a strong emphasis on women's rights and girls' rights. So I felt very comfortable to raise this with them, the importance of girls' education, not just primary, but secondary, and obviously also university level, if we want children, girls to become teachers, psychologists, doctors, administrators, that usually requires a university degree. And we were reassured by the de facto authorities that they will gradually open up. Now, time will tell us, and our colleagues on the ground will guide us and let us know the advances that are being made.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Yes, Celia and then Ms. Debedy.
Thank you so much. And I think I will change the region, if that's okay. But I want to know what's the situation for the education in places like Latin America. We know that in September was made an appeal by your organization for funds for Haiti, and at the beginning of the year as well for Venezuela. What can you tell us about the efforts in the region, and especially the conditions for in terms of education with the massive migration that we have seen during these past few months and from South America all the way to the north?
Thank you very much. Well, it's a different region, of course, but no less suffering for the refugees who have fled from Venezuela. Education cannot wait, working with our partners on the ground, Save the Children, and a big NGO consortium in Colombia, with UNICEF and Ecuador in Peru. We have invested quite substantively in refugee education, also working closely with UNHCR, of course, a close partner of ours. We released an emergency funding of, I think, about $2 or $3 million to Haiti just a few weeks ago. But we also have, and we have released emergency funding for children's education across the region, including in the place of region, Venezuela at one point, going straight into UNICEF, again, using the humanitarian imperative and the direct execution modality, meaning no money touches any government. In Colombia, we have a big, substantive multi-year investment for refugees coming from Venezuela. And I was out there just last year, and I am quite impressed to see the work done by Save the Children and many other civil society organizations in this consortium. It's a very good quality education, and the same goes for the work that UNICEF is doing in Ecuador and Peru. So yes, we are on top, and we continue. Everything depends on financing from our ODA donors, from private sector and private foundations. The more funding, the more we can do.
Thank you. Yeah, just quick, go ahead.
How important it is for people to understand that the work that you guys do has a direct impact in the lives of all of these children and adults that are they need education, especially when you're talking about refugees, people in mobility. Guaranteeing education is very, very difficult for a lot of the families, parents, and even for governments.
Well, I think it's very logical. We believe that education sits at the heart of all sustainable development goals. Because if you don't have education, If you have a nation where the children and the youth, the generation is not educated, logically, mathematically speaking, how do you end extreme poverty? How do you achieve gender equality? How do you achieve the targets for health or justice, good governance, or the rule of law? Education is the very foundation for any functional society. You can't start, you can't put the cart before the horse. It starts with the children and the youth. And then when they are educated, they can read and write, think critically, they have recovered from their psychological stresses and traumas, they are creative and are academically fulfilled and emotional and socially emotionally fulfilled. They're able to run a country and create stability, peace, justice, security, gender equality. Without education, it's not possible. And that's a very logical, I think, logical parallel or explanation. So it's not difficult to convince anyone. I think it's more about how much are we willing to invest financially to ensure that the world is stable, that the principles and of the Universal Declaration for Human Rights and its covenants and the UN Charter are achieved. Starts with education, and then all else will follow. So I think more and more of United Nations member states see this, and Education Cannot Wait is a very fast-growing UN global fund. We have mobilized a total and leveraged a total of $1.8 billion in just over 4 years. And we are a catalyst. The money goes to UNICEF, to UNHR, WFP, numerous civil society organizations, the Jesuit Refugee Service, IRC, NRC, and many local organizations. We have already exceeded the grant bargain of 25%. I think we are 27% already. So I must also give thanks to all our generous strategic donor partners who have contributed and ensured that we've been able to deliver to close to 5 million children a continued quality education only by the end of 2020, and during COVID-19 to 20 million children and youth. So we see a strong support from our UDA donors. We want to bring them to Afghanistan now.
Thank you. We'll take a few more questions, Mr. Abadi, and then we'll go to Pam, and then we'll come back to the room. Yeah.
Thank you, Stefan. Thank you, Ms. Sherif, for your
A little louder, Mr. Abadi, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. I have two-part questions, separate questions, actually. What does climate change have as an impact on the educational system in Afghanistan? And do you know of any contribution of the neighboring states to the educational system in Afghanistan?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that question. Well, climate change, as we know, signs of climate change is that you have an increase in desertification. So when you have desertification, you have less arable land. When you have less arable land, you have less food. When you have less food and food security, that creates conflict between pastoralists and agriculturalists. Afghanistan is a country that has a multitude of climate-induced disasters. I mean, besides the armed conflict and COVID-19, you have regular earthquakes, you have drought that is severe, and you also have a very difficult terrain to live in as a human being. So certainly Afghanistan is one of the countries that's been particularly impacted by climate-induced disasters, and which have only added to the consequences of the armed conflict and COVID-19. Your second question, yes, how do others contribute? Well, what we see is, of course, we have the traditional strategic donor partners, ODA partners, which is that have supported our programs. We are a pooled funding mechanism with our seat in New York that is distributed across the globe. But in Afghanistan, up to recently with our multi-year program, Sweden and Switzerland were very strong contributors, but we have all of North America, the United States have contributed substantively to education cannot wait globally, Canada, Germany, the Nordic countries, the European Commission, Switzerland. I worry so much when I mention, I don't want to forget anyone, and I think you should go into our web page and you will see the 21 strategic donor partners that we have. And from the Middle East, Dubai Cares have been a great contributor and founder of Education Cannot Wait. France, Italy are others. Again, there are so many of them, 21 strategic donor partner and private sector, such as the Lego Foundation, Porticus, HP, and many others. In the region, the special representative of the Secretary General, she is in talks with regional partners to see also how they can contribute financially. But we have to look at the whole world right now. All our strategic donor partners, no-day donors, and private sector have to help us contribute. What we are offering you is a direct execution modality. So we don't politicize this. So we focus on the people of Afghanistan, fund our UN agencies and non-governmental organizations, and work through Education Cannot Wait as a pooled funding mechanism where all of the money goes straight to our partners with less bureaucracy and more accountability towards the children and adolescents that we serve. This is a collective effort, all of us. It doesn't need to be political. It can be purely based on humanity and humanitarianism and the humanitarian imperative. And that's what's happening right now. More funding is needed, significantly more. All of us are responsible.
Thank you. Pam Falk, CBS News. Pam?
Thank you, Steph. Thank you, Yasmine. A very good briefing on a terrible crisis. My question is about the institutional funding to Afghanistan, the IFIs, the World Bank, IMF. Some of the aid has been given back. Some of the aid has been suspended. There has been an effort to unfreeze some of the aid that goes directly to the people. Have you contacted any of the IFIs? There's an awful lot of money there that's being frozen to see if that can flow into Afghanistan. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. It's a very good, thank you, Pamela. The UN Special Representative, the SRSG of Afghanistan, is in constant contact with these actors to see how funding can be unfrozen. And the reason here, and I'd like all of them to also, if they were to listen in and the message to go out, that when you do development in a crisis context, whether it's Afghanistan or any other crisis context, as the United Nations is so very good at doing and has been doing for so many decades, you do not need to put the funding, the financing into a government that you may not have recognized or is not exercising democratic governance. We have a direct execution modality. If money can be unfrozen and channeled into the UN agencies and the civil society organizations, then basic services can resume and be delivered right now. It's about being crisis sensitive. And this is what the UN is so good at doing together with its non-governmental partners. And I have to say that the de facto authorities lay no claim on that funding. They told us that if the UN agencies and the civil society organizations get the funding and they deliver teacher salaries, which UNICEF is willing to do tomorrow if they had the funding, or WFP or UNHCR or non-governmental organizations, they do not object to that. So there is a chance here to think creatively. I always say abnormal problems require extraordinary solutions. The UN has to answer direct execution channel the funding through the UN agencies and through the non-governmental organizations. And in the education sector, of course, education cannot wait. The UN's Global Fund for Education in emergencies and protracted crises like Afghanistan, we stand ready to support that channeling of financing. And we're equally happy to see the financing going directly to all our partners on the ground. But we need to act now. It cannot wait. The situation is dire and the country is about to collapse. And the harsh winter in Afghanistan can go up to -20 Celsius. And there's not a single heater in the homes of 75% of the population living in those mountainous areas and rural villages.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Dulcie Lembach, Pass Blue. Dulcie.
Hi, thanks very much. Just back to the number of girls still not in school. You said 10 oh, she's CBS News now.
She can hear you. It's just they switched the video. Go ahead.
I hear you.
Okay, so 10 million girls are still not in school. What percentage is that, roughly? And you say they're not in school since the Taliban took over. And so what is the Taliban's excuse for not letting girls go to school? Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, the schools were closed before the Taliban takeover. It was closed due to COVID-19 and were closed from 2020 to 21. So I think that's very important that they were closed when they took over. And as I said, schools are primary schools. We visited today a primary school of mixed girls and boys in Kabul. So at primary level, schools have reopened for both girls and boys. And as I said, for secondary schools, some have opened thanks to the great work done by UN colleagues on the ground and NGO colleagues who are negotiating that access for girls to attend secondary school. So we are now in a situation where we have to negotiate and go gradually from our side at the UN and NGO community. What the facto authorities have told us is give us a bit more time. We are working on a plan and we shall deliver it to you. We understand the importance of girls' education and just give us some more time. This is what we have been told and what our colleagues in the UN and NGO community are monitoring and exercising every opening to progress on those promises. So there's action being taken by the UN and NGOs on the ground. So now only time will tell, but we can see some light at the end of the tunnel with the opening of a few secondary schools for girls.
Thank you. Yasmine, are you up for 2 more questions and then we'll cut it off? Thank you. Yes, please.
I'm fine, as long as you're fine.
Yeah. Yeah. If you could just introduce yourself.
Yes, sir. Hi.
Your microphone. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
It's on? Yeah, okay. Noreen Hussain from IPS. IPS is UN Bureau Office. I just had a question, just to go back to Afghans. Did you mention that in the primary schools in Kabul have reopened for both boys and girls? I just wanted to know if you're aware, perhaps, any of the impact or the strategies that partner organizations have with reaching students, boys and girls, in like rural areas.
Thank you very much. I'm so glad you asked that question. It's a very important question because it may not have come out in my briefing. But the biggest investment that Education Cannot Wait has done, and I mentioned the $45 million, and the biggest investment that big UN organizations on education, such as UNICEF and NGOs, are doing is in community-based education in the rural areas. That's where we are investing, in the most marginalized communities, where transport is an enormous difficulty, where security situation is more unstable than in the capital, where you have the poorest of communities. And the community-based education system which has been implemented for years now. And again, as I said, we reached 58% girls through our investments, will continue. What is missing is funding, and it's linked to the formal system. So these are not non-formal education that will not take them to a continuity or create a pathway for them. On the contrary, these are community-based education systems established by the UN and NGOs out in the rural areas. It's happening as we speak, and all they are asking us to tell the world, we need more funding to scale it up, because now we have an access that we didn't have before. We have access almost across the entire country, is what our UN colleagues on the ground are telling us and our NGO partners. So financing for the community-based education system and the accelerated learning, especially for girls who've never been to a school, financing, and we can reach those 10 million girls, hopefully.
Thank you. One final last question, Stefano Vacara.
Yes, Stefano Vacara, watching New York. Thank you very much. It's a follow-up of the question before about girls in school. You talked about promise. You've been promised. Promise, unfortunately, are not always kept. So what is the plan if all of a sudden, after money is delivered, the schools are open, they're functioning, and the girls are all of a sudden not allowed to get in the school? Do you have a plan to reach this girl anyway with the help you're providing?
Well, first of all, we are cautiously optimistic. And we are cautiously optimistic after leaving Afghanistan just a few hours ago. And we have to. As United Nations, we have to be optimistic, because if we lose hope, imagine the girls sitting somewhere in the mountainous areas of northern Afghanistan, what they will do if we lose hope. We cannot afford not to be optimistic. Cautiously. We have a huge UN presence on the ground. We have staff in the UN, in the NGO community that worked for decades in Afghanistan. They know how to negotiate access. They know how to maneuver the situation, and we rely on them to continue the work they are doing right now to open gradually girls' secondary schools. So let us see, we are speaking about 1 month, 6 weeks, or 2 months so far. Give it a little bit more time, see what plan that the de facto authorities will present. And I am fairly convinced that our colleagues on the ground who have been working in Afghanistan for decades will find a way to cross that bridge. And if not, we will continuously advocate. Girls' right to education is a human right, a fundamental human right. We will advocate, we will find ways, because education also means supporting the dire food situation, the food insecurity. It means supporting the population with access to all other basic services that don't exist today. And we were told, and the impression we have, is that the de facto authorities is not willing to lose all basic services, because they also have to deliver or be seen to deliver to their people. So I let our colleagues on the ground do the negotiations, but I think they have the experience of the country to do so and know how to tie education to the broader scheme of things. If a government, recognized or not, does not deliver to its people, usually doesn't end very well either. So let's give it a chance. Let's see what happens. And let's trust our UN colleagues and NGOs on the ground and the SRSG to conduct those negotiations. But we must, of course, maintain our position that there should be full respect for international human rights, for women's rights, girls' rights, and international humanitarian law where there is a conflict. But right now, security incidents are actually decreasing. So that what we should put the emphasis on now is human rights and women's rights and girls' rights. And advocacy can take many forms and shapes. And I think we need to do it in a respectful way, but a fair way. The way the United Nations is so good at doing it. And look forward with cautious optimism.
Yasmine Sherif is joining us virtually from the airport in Islamabad. I think, Yasmine, please go check in, get some rest. You deserve it. And thank you very, very much. And feel free to check back in with us. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stefan. Thank you. Thank you to all of you for being there. Thank you so much and for your questions. Thank you.